Hello there. I hear you're looking for a good anime to watch. Yes, yes. You've come to the right place, so you're here looking for your first anime, is that right? Absolutely, absolutely. I can absolutely help you with that. How familiar are you with anime in general? You've heard about it, but you haven't really, delved into it too much. That's not a problem. That's not a problem at all. No, I can totally help you with that. No. Listen, anime is a very interesting medium of animation, and I think that a lot of people misunderstand it, and a lot of people understand it perfectly. So, this is what I'm going to do. Let me explain to you a little bit about anime, and then I'll give you some general suggestions. A lot of these things might not be for you, might not be. It's not a complete recommendation, but it's just a general overview of the landscape, if that's okay with you. Okay, perfect. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk about with you is that anime as a medium was born out of sort of a need to be cheap. And what I mean by that is that really early anime, which is animation typically from Japan, used a lot of tricks and a lot of sort of either like sliding, single frames to elongate a scene where people can be talking, people can be, emoting with very little animation, and that way you're able to get more bang for your buck. It is truly an animation style that was born completely out of sort of a need to be budget friendly. As time has gone on, however, and it's gotten much more popular, I think it has sort of morphed into a very different beast altogether. There's a lot of money that goes into it now. There's a lot of sort of like very expertly crafted animations, and there's a lot of not very expertly crafted animations. There's a lot of bad anime out there. I have to tell you, there's a lot of bad anime out there. So, just to give you a general landscape, I'm going to group all of the anime that I'm going to tell you about and suggest to you in groups of 3, okay? And the reason is because I think that it's absolutely perfect. You'll be able to understand sort of different genres in the anime space. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started here, because I think the first animes that I'm going to talk to you about is, I don't want to say the OGs because there's been animes before them, obviously, and they're inspired by a lot of things, but they're definitely what popularized anime within the West generally, I would say. The first one I'm going to talk about is One Piece, and this is the main character, Luffy. So, One Piece is an anime that is incredibly long. It's still going on, and it came out and started coming out very over 20 years ago. So I would say that it is very daunting to start, but the general premise of One Piece is simply that you have a pirate and they are searching for a treasure, the One Piece, and that is the basic premise. He collects friends and allies along the way, solves problems, that sort of thing, but they're pirates, and that is their goal, is to find the One Piece, and the One Piece sort of grants people powers and stuff. It's a very general overview. The general vibe is incredibly goofy. There are some serious moments, but overall it's very goofy, very silly. The main character is very happy-go-lucky, very bubbly, and he has the power to sort of like stretch, right? Like he can really stretch himself and morph himself into a lot of different things. So it ends up being very comical. But something that you'll see, a trend in anime, is that it can be very rough for women in anime. That is something that is varies from show to show, but for One Piece, I would say as the series goes on, you could say that it gets better, but you could also say that it gets worse. So it really, your mileage will vary. The characters themselves might be written well, but it's going to take a long time to get there, to get to a part where you feel like it's written really well. Okay, so you have One Piece, and then next you have Naruto. Now Naruto is one that is very, very popular, and I would say is probably one of the ones that you might have heard of. It's about ninjas, and it's about children really, but it's about ninja children really. But it's about this kid, Naruto, and he doesn't really have a lot of friends. And his goal, due to him not having a lot of friends, he thinks that he wants to be what is the equivalent of the leader of his village, sort of the king of his village, and that way people can respect him due to that. And people don't like him because of like something to do with his past. Something to do with how he was born, right? Like some magical thing. It's really not important for you to really get into it. But one of the things about Naruto that I think is very interesting, and something that you'll notice a lot in these kinds of anime, which I will say is shonen anime, which just means sort of like boy anime, is that there is a very intense rivalry in it. And this rivalry within Naruto sort of ends up being the backbone. Naruto ends up finding a rival, and this rival is another boy who is generally just much better than him. And so, he feels very intimidated, but very motivated to get better at being a ninja to impress this person. And it truly just becomes a story about like one of these characters sort of falling into darkness, and one character trying to pull them out, right? And you'll tend to notice that in some of these animes, there is a really big expression of genuine like male emotion, of like a male character having a lot of emotions and feelings and want for another male character. And while that is very, it's very nice to see, it can read very homoerotic. It can read a little romantic. And, if you're into that, that can be very good. It does border on a little bit of an obsession, but what I will say is that it's interesting. It's kind of interesting to watch. However, I will say the women in this show, not very good, not very well written, and it gets worse over time. It gets actually much worse over time, I would say. And I would also say that for the three that are going to be here, none of the women are really written very well. So, engage at your own risk when it comes to that. I would also say that there is a lot of roughness to the animation. A lot of these shows came out during a time when still, anime didn't have like amazing animation, but it had decent animation. And so as the show goes on, it gets better. However, these are also very high commitment shows. These are shows that you'll start and you might not finish even. There's a lot of episodes, a lot of story content to get through. And so if you're really wanting to sink your teeth into something, these are really good options. And even the third option here is very good, which will be Bleach. Bleach has the main character Ichigo, and Bleach is a little different than these two because even though Naruto is a little, the premise isn't necessarily as comical as the pirate seeking a treasure. This one is more like, a kid is trying to like be accepted. It both can be very comical in their own ways. Ichigo and Bleach, on the other hand, tends to take a bit more of a serious tone. The style tends to be a bit serious. And so it kind of comes through. And what all these animes have in common is that there's a lot of fight scenes. There's a lot of screaming, a lot of, like high intense emotions where like they're like yelling. There's anger, right? So, be aware that is something that happens here. And a lot of these animes, and these three in particular, these are like sort of the big three shonen animes of their time. They're not the big three anymore, but this was a time. One Piece is still going, so One Piece is definitely still up there. But these two are sort of, and they're kind of done now. So these are the three. And I'm so sorry, I didn't tell you too much about Bleach, other than the fact that it's a bit more serious. It is about sort of, it's a The setting is less fantastical. This is about ninjas in sort of like a fantasy world. This is about pirates in sort of another fantasy world. This sort of takes place in an alternate world where it's sort of modern day, but it's also not, because you have a sort of, I forget what they're called. I think they're called soul reapers or something, but or they hunt souls or hunt demons, something like that. It's been a long time since I've seen the show, but what I will say is that the vibe of this one is it's a bit more modern than these two. Okay, so that's that. So let's go ahead and move on to the next batch of 3. Okay, so those are our shonen anime. Very, very interesting. And let's go ahead and move on to some shojo anime. So shojo just means girl. It just generally means that it's intended for sort of female audiences, but just similar to the shonen, it can be enjoyed by everybody. So the first one that I'm going to suggest here, please excuse the choppy face, is going to be Sailor Moon. Sailor Moon was very, very popular and still is very popular, but it is essentially the magical girl, the quintessential magical girl show. It's about like a young girl who, encounters a cat and, gets these powers and wants to do good, right? It's a very classic story, and it's about her balancing both her like high school life, I believe it's high school, it might be middle school, but it's her school life, as well as sort of balancing sort of her new powers, right? And like what that means as a responsibility. I would say that it is a little bit older than some of the shonen that I showed you, but it does kind of hold up. It's kind of interesting, actually, and if you have the patience for sort of the slow start, I would say it's actually a very, very good watch, especially if you're looking for something a little less committal, because it doesn't go for as long, I would say, as the other one. This doesn't go as long as One Piece, but it certainly, there's enough content, and there's a lot of side content as well if you're really engaged in it. It's also a very pretty show. The aesthetics, especially in shoujo anime, I think the aesthetics tend to hold a bit higher weight. Which I find actually very, very amusing and very lovely to see, So there's that. Then we have Revolutionary Girl Utena, and this is Utena. Now, Revolutionary Girl Utena, also an older show. I'm sort of giving you some of the like pretty classic shoujo anime. And for my Revolutionary Girl Utena, it is, a lot of people love it. A lot of people grew up with it. And I would say that this is a show where the general premise is a tomboy wants to, a tomboy sort of finds herself in a sort of fighting club within her high school to fight for the possession of another girl / weapon, I think. I will say that this show is very hit or miss with people, especially if you come from sort of a cultured background. If you perhaps have darker skin, you might find this show a little bit problematic, especially because, there is a darker skinned character on the show, and she does get slapped very frequently, and it is kind of upsetting. But similar to Naruto, this show does end up having a sort of undercurrent of romance or homoeroticism between her and the dark-skinned girl who she is trying to fight for, right, in this club. And I think it's partially due to the fact that, honestly, I want to say it's due to the fact that, like, they want to show sort of female relationships and female friendships. But I honestly don't know if that's the case. It's because there is an explicit romantic element to it. So I would say if you're interested in seeing that aspect, if you're interested in seeing sort of how an older show dealt with a concept such as like romance between two girls in a time when perhaps like it wasn't as accepted. It's still not really in a lot of areas, but I would say that it's interesting. It's very interesting, and you'd have to sort of take it, at face value. There's going to be some parts that are not particularly good, I would say. And then, of course, the last one here is we have Madoka Magica. Again, excuse the chopped faces. And, the colors there's a little bit of liberty with the colors. Here at our company, we end up, we don't have a lot of colors. Colors are very expensive, so we end up, making do with what we have. But for Madoka Magica, it is another magical girl show, so it's very similar to this. This is kind of, I wouldn't say it's a magical girl show, but it has some very similar vibe. But this is a very, very explicitly magical girl show. But I would honestly say that this show, Madoka Magica, is making a lot of commentary about magical girl shows, and it's using that in a way that's kind of interesting. I don't want to spoil it too much for you, but it's basically a very similar setup to Sailor Moon, except that it's a bit more dark. Yeah, it can get a bit more, there's a bit more intrigue, and it's much shorter. It is much shorter, much more concise in what it's trying to its story that it's trying to tell. I believe it has maybe 24 episodes total, 20, 24, maybe even shorter than that. But like it's if you're wanting to dip your toes and you're wanting to watch something that has a narrative that perhaps is a little more concise and not like week to week. A lot of these shows came out week to week back when they were airing, whereas this one, I think, even though it did come out, I think, week to week, it has a very clear start to end. So these are our quintessential shojo anime. So that is what we have here. Then we will go ahead and move on to our next set of 3. These are not going to involve the characters in the art, but instead they're going to be sort of elements. Okay, so the first one is going to be I was reincarnated as a slime. This is not really a recommendation, more as a informative information telling towards you in regards to the landscape of anime nowadays. Nowadays, anime has sort of moved into the space of, fantasy fulfillment. As capitalism has gotten much worse, as people have started to sort of really have a really hard time with their day-to-day lives, they look to anime as an escape. And so you have a lot of what they're called isekai animes, and these are very, very specifically characters that are from our real world, reborn, reincarnated, transported to a fantastical world, but they still have a lot of their memories, a lot of their experiences from the real world still intact. This is specifically so that the person watching has a very, very, very easy time jumping into the story and relating to the main character. Now, I was reincarnated as a slime, as you might, guess. This person is reincarnated as a slime, and it is probably one of the more popular / quintessential isekai shows. But it also has, I would say, as much as the other shows have like really weirdly written women at times, particularly the shonen anime, I would say that these have very objectified women, and it's part of the they're trying to fulfill a fantasy for the viewer, for a specific kind of viewer. So go in it with your own risk. This is information. I believe one of these shows, I can't remember which one, where like they're being born and they're attracted to the mother. Is that, am I making that up? Go at your own risk. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, this next one is interesting because this one is and I'm going to have to look up the name here because it is a little bit long, and this also tells you how much the naming conventions have changed, because this one is called Campfire Cooking in Another World with My Absurd Skill. Yes, the titles are also a lot more specific, a lot more kind of goofy in that way, mainly because they're trying to get a specific person, and they want that person to be able to immediately tell what kind of story they're going to jump into. So for this one, essentially the person who is isekai'd into another world has the absurd skill of essentially being able to like online shop, right? So they are in like a fantasy setting, they're in like a medieval setting, but they're able to online shop, and they're able to online shop for food, right? So they're able to create a lot of dishes, a lot of cooking dishes, and they really wow the people of that time with their skill of shopping. It's actually it's kind of funny, not the show itself, but the concept is a little funny. I have not watched too much of this or any. This is merely something that I have seen within the landscape. And then the last one here, this one might be a little hard to tell from the picture, but this one is, and get ready, is a life with an ordinary guy who was reincarnated into a total fantasy knockout. Now, what does that mean? This is an isekai where two, I believe they're either co-workers or they're friends in real life, who are isekai. They're transported into a new world, a fantasy world. One person is transported kind of as a similar, same person as they were before. The other is, when they're transported, they are transformed into a very, very beautiful woman, right? So these are two men who are then transported. One of them is turned into a woman, and now this other guy is a bit confused, trying to get back to their original world while also being attracted to friend who is now a woman. What I find interesting about this concept is perhaps the play on gender that is maybe unintentional, maybe intentional. It's not. I wouldn't say it's necessarily good, but it's interesting. Why? Is it something that? Do they explore this? Do they explore this gender switch, and like, what does this mean for the person who is attracted to their friend, who probably maybe still identifies as male, but is currently embodying like a or presenting as like a woman? So what does that mean? It's fascinating to me. It's very fascinating. But these are the three isekais. Yes, I did not want to deign this piece of paper with the main characters, because some of them are a little bit of a sleazebag, so I don't really want to do that. But these are the three. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next and last set of three. So next I'm going to talk about anime that sort of straddles the line between genres. They could be considered shonen, they could be considered shojo, but they genuinely have interesting or good stories. If they're considered shonen, they might be written very deftly, very well. So the first one is going to be Frieren. Frieren is a shonen anime about a long-lived elf and her experience with being very long-lived, and her experience sort of heading and trying to meet the soul of her friend who has died, because she feels like she took his life for granted. I think it's a very, very complicated and very interesting premise. It can be very basic at times, in that like the world is very typical anime with mana, and you might not understand this, but it uses a lot of tropes in anime that are common. But what makes it very interesting is that there's an emotional undercurrent within Frieren that I find very interesting, and I would genuinely recommend Frieren if you are looking for an anime as your first time anime to watch, because it is genuinely well written, and it's genuinely a slow. It takes its time, you know. There are fight scenes. It is a shonen anime, so fights tend to be common in shonen. However, it is not the backbone of the show. Instead, the backbone of the show is sort of Freeren's relationship with humans and how that's evolving. So, you have that. And then we also have Witch Hat Atelier. Now, Witch Hat Atelier is an anime that is very recently come out. I don't actually know the particular genre of Witch Hat Atelier, but I will say that Witch Hat Atelier is very cute, has a lot of intrigue, but it is mainly about a young girl who really wants to learn magic, and is sort of whisked away into this magical world due to sort of something unfortunate that happens to her mother. One of the interesting things about this and about the world itself is that it really plays with a semi-unique magic system and how the magic works. It's all very calligraphy based or like symbol based. So I would say that it's if you're really interested in world building, if you're really interested in magic, and you know how the specifics about magic, I would say this is definitely the one to go with Witch Hat Atelier. If you're wanting very specific rules about magic, I don't think Frieren is necessarily what you want. It can be a little fast and loose. It does have like pretty intense mechanics, but it can be a little fast and loose, whereas this one feels a lot more solid. And then lastly, we have the Apothecary Diaries. Now, the Apothecary Diaries is a show that is highly, highly recommended and seems incredibly sweet, and it is one that I would recommend. However, I would recommend to form your own opinion about, because I have not gotten a chance to necessarily watch it quite yet. But I wanted to include it as one of the ones that is fairly well written and fairly good, just based off of people around me that have talked about it. And, you know, people in the company here, we do have a lot of, specifics, and, we go through this and we try and set this up for everybody. So this was one of the ones that was added that I had a hard time because I just never got around to it, So these are the three. Okay. And that is it. So that is all we have for you today. If you are interested in any of the anime, we do have them in the back if you wanted to get some of the DVDs, or we don't sell them or anything because we're not allowed to. Instead, it's simply a sort of borrowing if you wanted to, take it and bring it back, whatever, or, and sometimes we only have like an episode or two just to see if you're even just interested, Yeah, absolutely. Okay, yeah, you can go back there and take a look, and if you need me, I'll be around, okay? Okay, well, have fun.